I'll just say a few words and then we'll just pass over to Q&A. I just want to say, two things really. That the first is what fascinating talks, and it's been really interesting to hear two perspectives which actually tie in with each other quite nicely, I think, about the Ukraine situation and how it's arrived at that, how we've arrived at this particular place, and to hear some reflections on its origins, but also what potential it has in terms of the future to reshape the world. Just a couple of thoughts which occurred to me, which link to some of my own interests. So I'm a psychologist. I am a clinical psychologist. I spent 30 years studying actually paranoid beliefs, interesting, which suddenly seems to be quite a relevant topic. But I've actually lately become interested in political psychology, which is an area I've kind of shied away from until now, because I've sort of wondered whether I've sort of tried to keep my professional life separate from my politics, but I just don't think you can do that anymore, or at least I don't think I can do that anymore. But one of the things which I've become aware of in thinking about all of these things is the way that history affects our psychology and our views about history. And that came over, I think, in both of the talks, that Putin has a particular idea about history, which may not be, well, it isn't an accurate idea about how, it's not a true history. But there again, in a sort of way, I don't know how many of us actually, actually have a true histories in our heads. Each country builds a kind of account of history, a narrative of history. So for example, our account of history is in Britain is often very dominated by thoughts about what we did in the Second World War, usually ignoring what anybody else did in the Second World War, and particularly what Russia did in the Second World War. But we use history to sort of build identities. And of course, that's a common feature of a lot of the problems which we're having in the world today. And it's a factor which was important in Brexit. Identity played a role in terms of a sense that people who identified with as English, that was the main, major predictor of who voted for Brexit. And one of the things I found in my research is that the people who tended to vote for Brexit had a particular conception of British identity, English identity, and in terms of history, and particularly a kind of exceptionalist view of Britain's past. Of course, now in Britain we're now stuck because we've suddenly fractured into two separate new novel identities, which are the Remainers and the Leavers. And each of those are probably going to be with us for some time. So I don't really want to say much more other than to say that this rings a lot of bells for me in terms of the way that our conception of history is driving the way that we behave, and it's certainly driving the way that Putin is behaving. And perhaps one of the things we can, I will mention one more thing about that. One of the things we can do about that going forwards is perhaps be a bit more careful about what we teach our children about history. A few years ago, I visited an outfit in Thessaloniki. It was called, I think it was, it was called the Organization for Peace and Security in Southeastern Europe, I think. I'm trying to remember the name now. But they were running a project called the Joint History Project. And what they were trying to do was agree a common history curriculum across the Balkans. And the reason why they were doing that is because they perceived that the way that children were taught history in the Balkan areas was one of the factors which led to conflict. Now, if you're a Serb and you're brought up to think that Croats did all these horrible things in the past, then that made you much more likely to be violent towards Croats and vice versa. So they had this brilliant idea about trying to get which they achieved to some degree. They produced some joint textbooks which didn't try and present the true version of history, because there is no such thing probably, or certainly not a true version in the same sense that we can have, true scientific facts. But it was a kind of, what they did was they presented the historical facts as they were known, but also the different interpretations of those facts from the different sides. So every child who read about the history of various things which happened in the Balkans got some basic facts, but they also got how those facts were interpreted by different people. So it seems to me that, you know, that history is internalized. It becomes part of our psychology, and that's what's behind a lot of the conflicts which we're seeing in the world. And that seems to be certainly a factor which is very important in terms of driving Putin. Sorry, that's a bit rambling. I think I'll stop because I'm sure other people have got much more intelligent things to say. So should we have a look at some of the questions?